as Arno just said, for this year, this is the last book, for before summer, this is the last book club meet. Then we go into our summer holidays, and then we come back and pick up the thread in October. So, as I said, usually I choose a book to present for these book club meets. Usually, I choose a book which is connected to Pondicherry. Either it's a local writer, or it's a book where the story is set in Pondicherry. But sometimes I make exceptions and talk about books that need to be read, that are very interesting. And so today I will present this book, The Ivory Throne. Of course, there is a small connection with, because Pondicherry has a part of itself in Kerala, which is Mahe. I tried to invite somebody from Mahe who could have come and said something about the life of Mahe, but I couldn't find anybody. So unfortunately, we won't get that. But just we can remember that Pondicherry has a connection with Kerala because there is Mahe. Today I'm going to talk about the matrilineal traditions of Kerala, but particularly of the royal family of Travancore, which is now Trivandrum, the capital of Kerala. This royal family of Travancore was very famous, very wealthy, very powerful, and for some years lately, it was in the news because of this temple, Padmanabha Swami temple, which everybody started talking about the gold. Apparently there was tons of gold hidden inside, and everybody said, what is happening with the gold? We should take it out and check whether that gold is still there, and who does it belong to, etc. And the royal family was absolutely against opening the doors of this treasure room, and they said the gold belongs to Padmanabha Swami. It's a form of Vishnu, and I don't know finally what happened, but because of that, this royal family was in the news for some time. But I will go back to the times when this royal family followed the matrilineal traditions and continued to follow that tradition until some years before the independence. That matrilineal tradition in Kerala ended even before the independence of India. So, first of all, some words about the writer. The writer is Manu S. Pillai. Manu Pillai is an exceptional man because this is his first book, his very first book, and it was published when he was only 25 years old. Now he is 35 years old. This book was published in 2015, 10 years ago, by HarperCollins, and since then he has written 4 more books, and he is now a professional writer. But at that time, when he started writing this book, he was still doing his studies, and he did some jobs during that time. He is from Kerala himself, and he has got a master's in history from King's College, London. Not to be confused with King's College, Cambridge. King's College, London. He studied and did his master's in history from there. No, I'm sorry. He did his... He first did his... he got a bachelor's degree in 1990 from Fergusson College in economics. Then he got his master's from King's College, London, where he also studied international relations. He worked in the parliamentary office of Shashi Tharoor in Delhi, and in London he worked in the office of Lord Billy. So he was very close to power, administration, politics, etc. While he was studying in London, he also worked for BBC Radio for their program, which was called Incarnation. It was about India seen from the lives of 50 personalities. This book was written by Mr. Kilnani, and he helped him in his research work. Now, Manu Pillai is a full-time writer, and his books are non-fiction, history, what he calls popular history. That means he writes about history in a way that the common man can read and enjoy. It's not written like an academic. Because usually history books written like academics write is really boring and only academics read them. But he wanted that his research should reach the common man, so he writes it in such an interesting way that you read it as if you're reading a novel. Now I go to the title, The Ivory Throne. There was an ivory throne, a throne which was made with carved ivory, which one of the Maharajas presented to Queen Victoria. And it is still with the royal family in London, and it represented the throne of Travancore. Now I come to the main story. How did Manu Pillai write this book, first of all? He was only 18 years old when he started talking about this royal family and what happened to these royal people, where are they now? Because actually Manu Pillai grew up in Pune. So he didn't know that much about the royal families. And as everybody knows, most history books written for Indian schools talk more about the history of North India and very little about the history of South India. So in any case, this story of the royal family of Travancore is almost unknown in India. But as he was from Kerala, he started asking questions as to what happened to this royal family. But he said, I would hear my own family members saying, don't talk about them, don't talk about this family. There are some secrets, there is something, if you start pulling out the story, you will get a lot of tragic stories which will come out. So don't talk about them. But he says, as he was only 18 years old, the more people told him, don't try to find out, the more he was curious to find out. Because an 18-year-old, if you tell him, don't do this, he will do it even more. So he started looking into this story as to what happened to these royals. And then he found out that there was the last Maharaja of Travancore was called Balarama Varma, and when he was a child, he would have become king, but he was only 12 years old, so there had to be a regent who would rule in his place until he was 18 or 19. So this regent was actually Rani Sethu Lakshmibai, about whom mostly this book is about, this queen called Rani Sethu Lakshmibai. And so his interest was more onto her life because she was an extraordinary woman. Now we'll come back to this. I'll just show you. This is the cover of the book. There are two women sitting on this chair. The one who is on that side, to the extreme left, is the Maharani Sethu Lakshmibai, and the one who is sitting on the right side is her cousin called Maharani Sethu Parvatibai. Now, these two girls had actually been adopted. They were not part of the family, they were not in the direct line. They were adopted so that their children would become the next Maharaja. Now the matrilineal system, a matrilineal tradition is when the lineage of the family is traced through the mother, not through the father, but through the mother. That means the mother and her daughter, the mother's line passes through her daughter, from mother to daughter, and the son in the royal family of Travancore, every Maharaja was born of a Maharani. But his children didn't become the next Maharaja. This Maharaja's son didn't become the next Maharaja. So it's a bit complicated. The queen's son would be the Maharaja, but the next Maharaja would be the son of the queen's brother. Because in the matrilineal system, the main relationship, the main head of the family is the mother and her brother, not her husband. The mother and her brother, and so the brother and sister would be the head of the family. Manu Pillai says, how did this happen? How did this happen that only in Kerala there was this system of the lineage being traced through the mother, whereas everywhere else the lineage is traced through the father, from father to son, and from the son to his son, etc. When your identity is fixed according to who is your father, but in a matrilineal family, your identity is decided on who is your mother. Now Manu says, this probably is a residual from a tradition that existed in many parts of the world. He says that at the beginning it was there all over the world. And then slowly, in various parts of the world, it slowly changed into patriarchal families. So, how did it begin? Well, at the very beginning of human civilization, or I will say even before that, when human beings lived in tribes and they were nomads and they moved from one place to the other, and they lived in small groups, one thing was sure as to which child was born from which mother. But nobody knew who the father was. Because at that time there was no sense of the family. In a tribe, everybody lived together, and in those days, in prehistoric times, people thought that the woman created a child by her own magic powers, by herself. As if she had a power by which she could give birth to another human being. Because at the time when people lived in tribes together and moved as nomadic groups, they didn't know how a child was born. But they could see that the woman was giving birth to a child. So evidently they thought she was producing the child all by herself. They could not see that the child had a father. So in those early societies, women were not only respected, but they were also almost worshipped, because they believed, everybody in the group believed they had some kind of a power to produce children. But as time went by, slowly when people started settling down, when agriculture started and people lived in one place, they slowly realized that a woman can't produce a child all by herself. She needs the help of a man, and that every child has a mother and a father. Initially, when they were moving in tribes and living as nomads, a woman could have a sexual relationship with several men. So evidently there wasn't this idea that this child has this father. But when they started living in one place or living in a house, at that time it became more or less clear as to the fact as to who the father was. But even then, nobody can could be absolutely sure of who the father was, but everybody was sure of who the mother was. So the family was built around the mother who looked after her children. Everybody knew who her son and her daughters were. So the family, head of the family was the son and the daughter of this matriarch. Even in Egyptian societies, we know that the pharaoh and his sister were the main people of the family. And this tradition continued until slowly a man's physical strength was required for agriculture, for building, for wars, for fights, at which time the man became more important. And slowly human societies all over the world became patriarchal, where the father was more important and the mother became slowly less important when it came to power and inheritance. Here in Kerala, actually it was not everybody, it was the Kshatriya families, the Nair families, who had this tradition where the mother was the head of the family. Now, he says, probably because the Nairs were fighters and the men were all the time fighting wars, battles, or training to become good soldiers, so they had no time actually to look after their families. So the mothers would look after the families, and that's how they became much more powerful. And property passed from mother to daughter, or mother to her family, meaning her brother, including her brother. In fact, there is this tradition even in Tamil Nadu of girls marrying their own maternal uncle, their own mother's brother. At least one daughter was married to the brother of their mother. This is also connected to this tradition where the mother and her brother were the head of the family, and the family property, the family money would stay closer within the family if one of the daughters married her own maternal uncle. So, I think now it has slowly died down, but still it exists, everybody knows. The word mama in Tamil can mean many things. It can mean your mother's brother, it can mean your brother-in-law, it can mean your father-in-law, it can mean so many things. So, the mother's brother was a very important person in the family. So, Manu Pillai says that in these Nair families, in the royal families, this was the tradition, and the property stayed inside the family. Everybody jointly, the property was owned jointly by the whole family. There was no such thing as private property. Individuals didn't own property. The mother and her brother and all the children, they collectively owned the properties. And the decision as to what was going to be done with the property and the wealth of the family was decided by the mother and her brother. So, this kind of system was being followed by the Nair families, even those who were not part of the royal family. There was a father could not give his own property to his son because it was held collectively by everybody. So, this system was called the Marumakkatayam system. Anyway, to come back to this royal family, in 1890 there was a terrible crisis because the Maharaja, who was at that time the Raja, his sister didn't have any children. So there was a crisis as to who would be the next king, because the king had to be born from a Maharani. So the Maharani who was there, his sister, her name was also Lakshmi Bai. She decided to adopt two girls who were her own nieces. these two girls, one was called Lakshmi Bai also, and the other one was called Parvati Bai. Now, before their mothers could have children, this Maharani called Lakshmi Bai, not to confuse with Sethu Lakshmi Bai, she went on a pilgrimage to Rameshwaram in Tamil Nadu to pray for the birth of daughters. This is absolutely unheard of in India. Nobody goes to pray for the birth of daughters. People go to pray for the birth of sons. But in this special case, in this special matrilineal family, the Maharani went to Rameshwaram to pray that daughters would be born to her cousins, to her nieces, so that the next generation would have Maharanis and their children would then continue this tradition. So because she prayed at Rameshwaram and later two girls were born, two sisters, they were called Sethu Lakshmi Bai and Sethu Parvati Bai because of this Ram Setu which is there in Rameshwaram, to commemorate the fact that they were born by the blessing of Lord Shiva and that she had gone to pray at Rameshwaram. Therefore, they were called Sethu Lakshmi Bai and Sethu Parvati Bai. This is very important because in this royal family, almost every princess was called either Lakshmi Bai or Parvati Bai. Sometimes there was also a Gauri Bai. And yes, and Manu Pillai says, you can see this name Bai is added after the queen's name. It is actually a tradition which was there in the Marathas, with the Marathas in Gujarat, maybe in Rajasthan also, but the Maharashtrians in the families, the word Bai was added after the name of a woman. So in Kerala, which was not part of the Maratha kingdom, but still they took this because this was a tradition in the adjacent, and also the Marathas were very, very powerful at that time, at one time. So these two girls, the name Sethu was added in front of their names. And they were officially adopted in the year 1900 so that their children could continue the tradition. Their sons would become Maharajas. So, as soon as they were adopted, they were given a proper education of how they should behave as Maharanis. They were taught English, Malayalam, Sanskrit, history, geography, maths, as well as there was an English woman who came to teach them aesthetics and etiquette, because there was very, very strict protocol in these royal families. And so they slowly grew up. Even though I said that in matrilineal families, women were very important, you have to remember it was not as if they had absolute power. They had power, but not absolute power. So, when they were 10 years old, their marriage was fixed. And they were given a choice. Usually women in those days were not given a choice, but because it was a matrilineal family, it was their tradition that the girl would be given a choice as to who she wanted to marry. So the family chose two men as the prospective husbands for Sethu Lakshmi Bai and 5 boys for Parvati Bai, out of whom the 2 girls chose the one that they liked. Now I'll make a little aside. These 2 girls were actually the granddaughters of Raja Ravi Verma, the famous artist. Raja Ravi Verma was not a Raja actually. The title Raja was given to him by the British because he was an extraordinary artist. He was the first artist who painted in the European style realistic portraits of people, realistic human figures, realistic landscapes. He learned to paint from European artists, And he was the first one to paint gods and goddesses who looked like human beings. Unlike before that, gods and goddesses were represented in a very, very stylized way. But he was the first one who painted Lakshmi, Saraswati, and various gods and goddesses whose pictures we still see. Whenever you buy these printed pictures of Lakshmi and Saraswati, you will see these are paintings actually done by Raja Ravi Verma, who used a human model who sat, whom he saw and painted, and created these pictures of Lakshmi and Saraswati and various other mythological characters, Shakuntala and Ganga and so many other mythological episodes he has painted. His paintings are so famous we don't even know they're painted by him because we know them as so commonly we have seen them. But Raja Ravi Verma was not a Raja, but he was married to a woman of the royal family who was a princess. And it so happened that, of course, in those days, these matrilineal families, the woman never left her house. She got married, but she didn't go to her husband's house. The husband came to live with her. Often they lived, in fact, in a separate palace, not even in the same palace, because they were not considered royal. They were not considered close enough to the Maharani. They were considered as in a secondary place. And so the husband could come and go. Sometimes the Maharani would call her husband to come and be with her. And when she didn't want, she could tell him, now you can go to your own palace. They have that much power. But in the case of Raja Ravi Verma, his wife took it very badly that he was never at home. He was always traveling, he was painting, he went and lived for quite a while in Baroda, in Pune. He started this printing press where he was the first one to print pictures, his pictures, and sell those pictures of gods and goddesses for a very, very small sum of money so that everybody could buy the pictures of goddesses. He was almost never there and she was very unhappy about this. And in fact, she took to alcohol and she died very young in a state of depression. But they had 3 daughters. So these 2 girls are the daughters of 2 of their daughters. So even though Raja Ravi Verma was not considered a royal or anything, but he is such a well-known figure that we can connect to that. These are the granddaughters of Raja Ravi Verma. So, so then they were given a training and they were brought up to be Maharanis. And they were married around the age of 10, which was usually the common practice. And only when they reached puberty could their husbands come and actually live with them. So they had this privilege of having tutors come to their palace and to teach them. Amma, can I have the next picture, please? Now we are going to follow the life of this Maharani, who is Rani Sethu Lakshmibai. In this picture, you see her with her daughter. Now I'll come back and continue with the story. So as they grew and got married and lived in these fantastic palaces, this tradition of the Maharanis living in extreme protocols where they were never alone, they were followed from morning to evening. There was a special ceremony for every hour of the day. If they brushed their teeth, it was something very special. Like Manu says, it was called the royal cleaning of the pearls. It was not the cleaning of the teeth, but the cleaning of the royal pearls. Or, when they sat down to eat, there was a whole protocol as to what they would be served. When they went out anyway, they had to be followed by a certain number of people. Everything was done according to tradition, according to protocol, according to who they could speak to, according to who they couldn't speak to, etc. Who would have to bow before them, who could sit next to them. All this was very, very, very in details written down. And so one of the things that Rani Lakshmibai says, one of the difficulties of her growing up years was that she was never alone. She wanted to be alone, but she was never alone. They were, especially because they were girls, there were always somebody or the other near them, so that there would not be any breach of protocol of any kind. Now, as they grew up and they got married, the Maharaja, who was at that time the Maharaja, died. So now, the next Maharaja would have to be chosen, who would be the son of one of these queens. As it happened, it was the senior, she was called the senior Maharani, and her younger cousin was called the junior Maharani. The junior Maharani had a son, but the senior Maharani, first of all, she had a miscarriage, and then a couple of years later, again a miscarriage, so she didn't have children for a while. So, clearly, the junior Maharani's son was going to be the next Maharaja. When the previous Maharaja died, soon after his younger brother also died, otherwise he would have been the king. But when it was declared that the junior Maharani's son would be the next Maharaja, then there had to be somebody who would rule instead of him until he was old enough. And that was the senior Maharani. Not the mother of the boy, but the older sister, the older cousin of this Maharani. So she became the regent, and the boy who was going to be the Maharaja, he was only 12 years old. Naturally, his mother started saying, no, it should be me and not her, because I'm the mother of the Maharaja, future Maharaja. But according to this matrilineal system, it had to be the oldest woman of the family who was this queen. And that created a big disharmony in the family, a big fight. The mother of this future Maharaja, she went to the Viceroy of India and complained that this is not right, that she should have been the regent and not the Lakshmibai. She complained that this was unfair, but of course wherever she went she was told, no, this is the system of the matrilineal tradition, you cannot be the regent. Then she said, no, there should be a group of people, a council of regents, and I will be part of that council. But even that, they said, no, it cannot be done because we are following this tradition. Of course, by that time, Travancore was a British protectorate, and there was a British resident who was there to decide what was going to happen, to oversee the administration. So, the senior Maharani became the regent, but by that time she already had she had a daughter. Unexpectedly, she says that she didn't think she would ever have a child, and then quite unexpectedly she was pregnant and she had a daughter. Some years later she had another daughter. So, and the junior Maharani had a son, another son and a daughter. So it was going to be, the Maharaja was going to be her son. If he died, it would be the other son. And so, in an unusual way, this queen, Maharani Lakshmibai, had the power to rule as if she was the Maharaja. She was called Her Highness the Maharaja, because she had the power of a Maharaja, and she ruled as not as a figurehead, but she actually ruled. In all other kingdoms, when the Maharaja was too small and there was a regent, that person, usually his mother, was just a figurehead, and others ruled instead of her. But in this case, this Maharani actually herself ruled Travancore. And she is famous because she brought about several changes which would not have come about if it hadn't been her. So at this point, I'll read a little from the book. So, the author of this piece, that means Manu himself, captured the simple essence of matrilineal society in Kerala. For here, a family did not take after the patriarchal model of man, wife, and their children. Instead, it consisted, to put it simplistically, of man, his sister, and her children. The crown passed not from father to son, but from maternal uncle to nephew. And the Rani was never the Maharaja's wife, but his sister or the niece or great niece. Ilam Tirunal, for instance, did not inherit his title or throne from his father, who was only a glorified nobleman, but from his mother, the Rani, and her brother, the previous Maharaja. His heirs, too, were first his younger brother and then the son of their sister, and thus the crown passed in this somewhat topsy-turvy fashion down the ages. The Maharaja's own children were merely nobles with the consolation of certain exclusive circles, titles and estates, fated as they were for oblivion after the lifetime of their exalted father. This queen, Maharani Lakshmi Bai, she was the first one. Maharani Lakshmi, Setu Lakshmi Bai and her Diwan had achieved much, if only in a few years' time. Plain numbers, more than anything else, revealed the extent of their accomplishment. When the Maharani succeeded to power in 1924, the treasury commanded revenues of 199 lakhs, but by 1929 this mounted to 256 lakhs, which was a 28% increase. Yes, so she ruled for 7 years, 1924 to 1931. Whether it was the opening of all, yes, so she's famous for something very important. There was she brought railways to Kerala, to Trivandrum. She brought electricity to Kerala, and she also brought telephones connections to Kerala. She modernized Kerala in a way that was not moving forward, because the previous Maharajas, they were very, very conservative. They didn't want all this. In fact, when the railways were supposed to, when the British proposed to bring railways, the previous Maharajas, those who counseled him, said, no, this is the devil's work. What is this? This smoke belching carriage, this is something we cannot accept in our kingdom. So, the idea of bringing rail transport to the coast had first come up in 1880s, but Orthodox Brahmins decried the fire carriage as the instrument of the devil, creating a shrill hue and cry, so that it would be 1903 before a train chugged into this state. Even then, the Maharaja refused to allow it to desecrate Trivandrum. It didn't come up to Trivandrum. And it was left to Sethu Lakshmibai to erect the central station at the capital and to extend the line into the city. Even though the Maharani did not undertake further expansion and to avoid indebting the state during interim administration, she did allow groundwork to proceed and surveys were conducted to extend the railways further. So she was modern in that sense. She brought these three things, railways, telephones and electricity, to Kerala. But one thing for which she became more famous is that there was this demand, and Mahatma Gandhi was part of this. He gave his support to this demand that the doors of the temples should be opened to all castes of people, but to the low caste people. And this is known as the Vaikom Satyagraha. And when this was demanded, the Queen said, I cannot take this decision. In fact, she was very, very traditional in many senses. Although she was very modern in many senses, she was also very, very conservative in many things. She did not want to open the gates of the temples to the lower caste people. But during the talks, she said, okay, I will allow them to come to the streets outside the temple. Because till then, the low caste people were not allowed to even come to the street next to the temple. So she said they can come to the north, south and west side of the temple, but not to the eastern, because that's where the gates were. They cannot come up to the gate. And I will wait until the Maharaja comes to power so that he will take the decision as to whether we should allow lower caste people to enter the temple. She didn't actually allow this, but Mahatma Gandhi praised her because he came to meet her regarding this and said, at least she has listened to it, at least she has accepted that lower caste people should be allowed to come near the temple, to the streets of the temple. And he was deeply impressed by the fact that this Maharani was so simple. You can look at her, she's a Maharani of such a wealthy state, but she's absolutely simple. And the women of Kerala in those times, even the princesses, simply wore this cotton cloth around their body. In fact, by the time she became queen, they were wearing a blouse. Before that, they didn't even wear a blouse. They would wear just this white piece of cloth with gold border, and that was that. And the simple way in which she did not have more jewelry than what you can see, Gandhiji was absolutely flabbergasted that a Maharani could be living so simply, and he said, this is what people should follow, this is what the royal family should follow, to live in this utter simplicity, even though you are a queen. He said, I have seen queens and kings, they are covered in gold, they are covered in very, very expensive jewelry, but here is a Maharani who is so simple, and he took that as a great virtue. But that also came from this tradition in Kerala where people live very, very simply. Can I have the other photo? You will see there is a picture of, this is a painting by Raja Ravi Verma. That is his daughter, Raja Ravi Verma's daughter, who is holding her son. Sethu Lakshmibai is the daughter of this princess. This is the mother of Maharani Sethu Lakshmibai, who is holding her son, who is the brother of Maharani Sethu Lakshmibai. This is her mother and her brother. But you can see how the princesses, how the queens lived at that time. She was not a Maharani, she was a princess. But they didn't even wear a blouse. That was how they lived. And just this white sari with the gold border. You can see Raja Ravi Verma's style of painting, which depicted people as they were in a very, very natural way, in a realistic way. And you can see even the expression of the child is so real, almost photographic, we might say. So everybody, all the princesses dressed like this. And in fact, Manu Pillai says that the Queens thought that it was when the British brought in this idea that what is this? The Queens are bare-bodied like this; they should wear a blouse. It was the British who started bringing this notion that women should wear a blouse, and so they started wearing blouses. But the older generation used to look down on it. They used to say, "Oh no, how can you wear a blouse? You were breaking the tradition. This is the way we live. We don't wear a blouse." And so for the older ladies of the royal family, they used to think that this was something that was, they were horrified by it, that the women wanted to wear a blouse. But it was in fact the British who brought in this idea that this matrilineal system should slowly disappear, because they wanted to standardize the way people lived in India, especially the royal families, where property went from father to son, and where they wanted that there should be something very homogeneous in all these royal families and in Indian society in general. So in fact, they were the ones who were saying, "Oh my God, look at these ladies of Kerala, the way they live." And also, in the book, we are told that before the generation of Rani Lakshmi Sethu Lakshmibai, the queens, the king's mother, the king's wife was not the Maharani. She was called Amachi. That means she's the mother of his children. She had no status whatsoever. And the husband of the Maharani also had no status. They had a particular name which was passed on, in general, the consort of the Maharani. And the fact that if they were widows, they could remarry immediately. It was something very normal for widows to remarry. Whereas everywhere else in India, we know that widows had a very, very bad time, and even there was the tradition of their being burnt as satis on the funeral pyres of their husbands. So, but this didn't exist in Kerala. In Kerala, it was just the opposite. If a queen or a woman became a widow, she was fully allowed to marry again and continue. There were even divorces generations before this Maharani, where the queen or where a woman, a matriarch, could very easily decide that she didn't like the husband and she could take another husband. So it was the British who started saying, "What is this way of living? This is such an immoral way of living, etc." And even their marriages were very simple. There was no great ceremonies or long ceremonies, etc. It was very simple. The woman and the man just stood in front of a lighted lamp, and he would give a piece of cloth to her, and that was that. That was the ceremony. It was called sambandham. It was a relationship. It was not more than that. And the true relationship, the most closest relationship of a woman was her brother, not her husband. So, this life that the kings and queens lived at that time slowly started changing. And by the time these two queens, the senior Maharani and the junior Maharani, came to power, they started living as other women lived, with one husband, with always being very thoughtful of him, living like elsewhere, looking after their husbands. Even Rani Sethu Lakshmibai always stayed with her, wherever she went with her husband, etc. And although the junior Maharani is supposed to have had several men in her life, and for which by that time people were scandalized, which earlier would not have happened. And so this continued, and the Maharani brought, in her lifetime, she brought modernity, a modern lifestyle to Kerala. But during her reign in 1925, this matrilineal tradition of Kerala was completely abolished. And she's the one who had to sign on this document saying that this system will be abolished, because there was so much pressure from the people as well as from the British that this system is not in tune, is not like everywhere else. And the men who had started living in nuclear families wanted that a father should be allowed to give the money he had himself earned and the property he had got with his own money, to be able to give it to his son. And so, although she was the Maharani, she had to sign this law, this document saying that this would be abolished forever. And by the time the Maharaja was crowned, and her regency ended, this tradition was not only gone, but this Maharani was very badly treated by the new Maharaja, her nephew, who started saying that, I'm going to change the protocol. You will not get as much money as you received for living, because a Maharani had a certain amount of money which would be given to her. He didn't want her to have a palace, he didn't want her to have servants, and you can imagine her life. His mother, the junior Maharani, was extremely revengeful. She took revenge on the senior Maharani for not having allowed her to be the regent. And so she was so badly treated that she decided she would leave Trivandrum and go away. So bad behavior was anyway coming from her nephew and the junior Maharani. But the last straw was that the staff of her palace wanted to form a union and protested against this, that, and demanded all sorts of things. And that was really the last straw. She decided that that was the end. She left Trivandrum and she went to live in Bangalore, where she lived for the rest of her life and where she died. So you can imagine this change over from the kingdoms which were there, and the independence came, royalty was finished. Each king had to give, or queen had to give their kingdom to the Republic of India, so that that kingdom became part of the greater republic. The kings could not rule their own kingdoms anymore. From being the Maharani to just becoming somebody, an ordinary citizen, it must have been a very, very difficult thing. And that too, she left Trivandrum. And again, as she was leaving, before she left, the Maharaja had already declared that lower caste people could enter the temples. And this thing the Maharani didn't like. So, as she was leaving, she told her driver, she gave some money to the driver to go inside the Padmanabha Swami temple and put it in the hundi, and she said, you say a prayer from me to God, and goodbye, I'm going. And so she left, and she never entered a temple again. When she was asked why she didn't want to, she was invited to come, she said, no, God is in my heart, He is with me, I don't have to go to Him. This was her excuse, but everybody knew it was because she didn't want to enter a temple where lower caste people had been allowed to enter. But this very same lady who was so orthodox that she didn't ever step into a temple again, was so open-minded that when she was the Maharani, when she was ruling, her personal physician was a Christian woman. This would have been unheard of before that a Christian woman was going to touch her and that she would be her physician. When she was the Maharani, the tradition was that if they spoke to Europeans who were considered less than lower caste, they had no caste at all, so if she spoke to them, she would have to go and have a wash. if she shook hands with them, it was so polluting she had to go and have a bath. So, all discussion with the British resident or even her divan, her minister, had to be done before 9 o'clock in the morning, because after she had spoken to them or even shook hands with them, she would go and have a wash. She would have a bath. Before her bath, she could meet Europeans. She continued this tradition, but at the same time, she was so open-minded and so encouraging of women that her personal physician was a Christian woman. Not only a woman, but a Christian woman. And towards the end of her life, she even accepted that her granddaughter marry a Parsi. Something totally unheard of before that. So, when she moved to Bangalore, she built a new house next to her daughter's house. Her daughter was called Lalita. She lived next to her daughter. She had two daughters, one was called Lalita and the other was called Indira. And she wanted to live next to her family, next to her children, next to her grandchildren, with her husband. Can I have the other picture, please? This is her daughter, Lalita. You can see the change that had come over the women. Look at her hair, cut short. You have seen the hairstyle of the Maharani when she was a teenager, how her hair was and how she was dressed. And here you can see her daughter Lalita wearing the sari as the urban women wear, her hair cut short like the English women, standing next to her husband whom she had chosen. She has jewelry, etc. You can see that there is a tremendous change between her mother and the way she dressed and the way she, this Princess Lalita, dressed. They were extremely anglicized because they were sent to schools where they were given the best of education. And there are so many letters in this book written by the daughters to their mother and the mother to their daughters, where you can see, the language, the way they wrote their English was like an English mother writing to her English daughter. They used to celebrate and enjoy themselves. They wrote to each other in English. They spoke to each other often in English as well. And one of the things that she would say to her daughters is that, the way you speak, the way you behave, it shocks your the other half of the family, the junior Maharani and the then Maharaja, because you are so modern, you are so westernized. Your bob hair, she says, it shocks the others in the royal family. And her daughter Lalita, she said, I don't want to have anything to do with the royal family. I will just be Mrs. Verma, Mrs. Lalita Verma, and that's it. I don't want any kind of special treatment. And so the two daughters, the other daughter lived in Madras, which is now Chennai, and they came to visit the Maharani from time to time. And she said, I don't want to have anything to do with that royal family. I want to stay away from it. And Rani Sethu Lakshmibai had quite a nice social life. A lot of people came to visit her. She had her own cooks and her own servants, etc. But she was happy to be away from the royal family. And when her husband died, she became really very lonely. The one thing she wanted when she was a child was to be alone. And at the end of her life, she was alone. But that was not solitude, that was loneliness. Even though her children sometimes came to see her slowly and slowly and slowly, she became more and more lonely. And she says, she had a huge mansion, but then the government of India decided that there would be a ceiling as to how much property an individual could own. And so she was told that she had more property than she could. So she divided her house into 3 parts so that she could give away a part to her daughters, 2 parts to her daughters. And so she says that once I was a Maharani, I had a palace, I had a kingdom. And now I just have a small house, I have only a room. In the end of her life, she lived in one room, and as he says, she spent her time looking at the sun setting, dusk appearing through the various windows. I have to add this, because this is something I didn't know, I found out reading this book, that when the kingdoms were being given to the Republic of India by the royal families, Trivandrum, the royal house of Travancore, didn't want to give their kingdom to the country. They said, we will remain an independent country. Just like Hyderabad wanted to be independent, they wanted to be also an independent country. They said, we will be a country called Travancore, finished. We don't want to give it. I read elsewhere that there was also this matter that they had large reserves of thorium, which can be used for generating great amount of energy. They thought that with this we will be so rich, we will have our own army, we will have our own, we will just be an independent country. But as time went by, and there was talks with the Viceroy saying that we don't want to be part of India, we want to be an independent country. Talks were going on, but then they realized that the people didn't want that. The royal family didn't want to give the country to the kingdom, but the people wanted to be part of India. So at the end, they had to finally, almost at the last minute, take the decision that this Travancore would become part of India, part of Kerala, and they had to let go of it. So the Maharani, at the end of her life, it's a very tragic thing, because the very last year of her life, she would receive letters to Srimati Lakshmi Bai. Srimati Lakshmi Bai. She who was Maharani Setu Lakshmi Bai would receive letters to Srimati Lakshmi Bai, living in Bangalore. The very last day, at the very end of her life, is very tragic, because she had this tradition every year on New Year's Day at midnight, when the year passed from one to the next. In their family, they had this tradition that everybody would come together and wish, and this queen would wish everybody, and she would give sweets to everybody, and everybody would wish each other Happy New Year. But that year, she died in 1985. That year, a few days, she lived a very quiet life. For New Year's Eve, the Maharani, now missing most of her teeth and physically diminished in the extreme, asked Mary to dress her better than usual. For it was a family custom for everyone, from the adults down to the children, to get into fancy dress and burst into her room at midnight shouting, Happy New Year! Setu Lakshmi Bai would clap in glee and laugh at all the costumes arrayed before her, before proceeding with the usual ritual of handing out toffee to everybody present. For the new year of 1985 also, she waited in bed for the party to begin. But midnight came and went, and nobody arrived to greet her. Anu, can I have the last picture, please? That is the Maharani at the end of her life, an old woman. And she, the year 1985, New Year's Day, no one came to wish her. She waited for them. No one came to wish her. It so happened that Lalita was unwell and didn't want the Maharani to find out. Everyone had, therefore, stayed away from the latter's room. In great disappointment, she went to bed, giving the sweets to her servants and nurses instead. The whole family felt sorry for having let her down, hoping to make up for it the following year. But they were not destined to have a second chance. In February 1985, Setu Lakshmi Bai began to groan in pain, and doctors realized that bones in her body had shattered, causing her great agony. Medication did not help, and on 22nd February, she passed away at the Malige Medical Center in Bangalore, cremated like everybody else at the Wilson Garden Electric Crematorium. Can you believe this? You know, the funeral, the cremation of a Maharani would have been so full of pomp and pageantry, but she was just cremated in an electric crematorium in Bangalore. She knew her time had come, for as she was being taken away to hospital, she called to Rukmani's son, her great-grandson, and said to him in a pained whisper, "Jay, I'm going away." And that was the end of her life. Not only she lived as the Maharani, but she lived during this transition when India went from being a collection of kingdoms to becoming a republic where kings and queens lost their importance and they just became an ordinary citizen of India. So this is the story of Rani Setu Lakshmibai. Do read this book. It looks like such a thick book, yes, but it is so well written, so interesting, full of so many details that you will read it as if it's a novel. Thank you very much for having me.
I learned so much from this. You realize how little we know of the kings and queens who were at the end of that phase when India became a republic, and what happened to them, how they lost their grandeur, their wealth, their fame, and how they went into this new republic, this new life. Thank you so much. We'll meet again.